I'm just going to get right into it here. So today we are here to talk about Teams Android devices, and specifically the change that we are making to the MDM enrollment capabilities into Intune. So we're going to talk about what you have hopefully seen in blog posts, in communications on LinkedIn, in conversations across social media. And I know we've got 400 plus people joined here now. So hopefully we've got kind of a mix of customers and partners and OEMs all here to learn today about this change that we're doing. So I'm going to get right into it with the slides here. And as we look forward, I want to just start by explaining what is AOSP device management. And so AOSP device management for us, and these slides are written by me, they weren't written by marketing, so you're getting the more technical aspects of what this story is. So kind of starting off and making sure that everyone has a baseline understanding of the different terminologies and things that you might hear me say today. AOSP stands for Android Open Source Platform. This is the open source project that every Android device in the world is built off of. So be it your Samsung mobile phone, your Teams Rooms device, your Teams phone device, or other Android devices, what you might find even in a car. Some of the car infotainment systems are Android at heart. This is the overarching platform. Intune, so our sister team from the Teams side, the Intune team, created what is called Android Open Source Project Mobile Device Management. So AOSP Device Management and AOSP DM is how you'll see me abbreviated a bunch of times in these slides. But at the end of the day, it is the device management and device enrollment methodology for Android devices that the Intune team has created. Now, this MDM enrollment, which is mobile device management platform, was created to replace what was device administrator. So originally, long time ago, when Android first became a thing, the original MDM enrollment capability was Android Device Administrator. That's what you used on every mobile phone, on every room device, on every Android device. If you wanted to MDM manage it, you used Device Administrator. Teams devices today still use Device Administrator. But Android Device Administrator has been deprecated from support from the open source project. We've continued to support it across the different devices and across the different platforms over time to make sure that folks are still able to manage their devices, but we knew that there was going to come a day where we needed a new product. And what we were waiting on was the Intune team to build it, because the Intune team needs to manage more than just Teams devices. There's a billion plus devices in the world that all run Android that can't use the other MDM enrollment methodologies I'm going to get to in a second. But in doing so, what we are doing from the Teams side is we are removing that company portal app that exists on all of the Teams Android devices today, and we are going to instead have a new agent that is the AOSP Device Management Agent, and the Microsoft Authenticator app, that same Authenticator app you use to approve your MFA requests on your phone, that same app is going to come to the mobile devices to handle the authentication broker in the background. And then what you see down there in the bottom in red is this isn't MDAP, which is the whole other story that you keep hearing from Microsoft around us taking over the AOSP side and adding our ingredients to it to make it better. This is not that. This is wholesale managing every Android device across the globe, not us taking over the whole operating system. And then a lot of customers ask why. Microsoft, why? Why are you doing this? What are you doing? Why are you making us go through this change? Why are you building this new thing? We have these other ways to manage devices today. What are you doing? So AOSP device management is intended to be more reliable and scalable. So the initial build for it is a like-for-like capability of what you get with Device Administrator, but we're building it to be able to add new capabilities and new management and new orchestration in the future. It's also going to be updatable without doing a firmware update. And because Device Administrator has been deprecated from the Android open source project side, there's been no further innovation there in the last several years. So you've even seen some capabilities disappear, like corporate device identifiers, for instance, only work on some devices, depending on which version of Android you're running. So things have changed over time and have adapted, and we're moving and modernizing and going to the new world. This is going to be a platform for further innovation in the future also. So things like dynamic enrollment today. Today, enrollment is a very manual process on every device. It's only something you can do with a sign-in. We'll be working towards a more dynamic enrollment methodology with AOSP device management. And we'll also be adding additional configuration policies in the future, maybe being able to deploy certificates to devices or being able to manage configurations on the devices all up, where today you can basically toggle like 2 or 3 things, which is very like for like with what you've got with Device Administrator. Our goal is to make this a very rich manageability platform in the future while still giving you all the capabilities you already had today. And now the other customer big question is, Microsoft, I use Android Enterprise to manage all of my other devices, all of my user devices, every user's mobile phone. Why can't you guys just use that? So our whole piece is Android Enterprise specifically requires Google mobile services to be running on a device. So you have to have the Google Play Store, you have to have the different Google services running on that device in order to support Android Enterprise because it is a Google offering. Now, Teams devices don't have Google services on them. This project, this AOSP device management project internally is named NGMS, which is quite literally non-Google management services. So this was, how do we build something that doesn't have all the Google services on it? The answer is this AOSP device management platform that the Intune team built. The other really important thing to note is that there is a country in the world where Google isn't able to provide services, and there's about 1 billion Android devices in use by users today there. So this AOSP device management platform is used both to manage end user devices in certain countries, as well as Teams Android devices across the globe based on various needs. There's also a couple of other devices, some RealWare kit and a couple of other base pieces of hardware that don't have Google mobile services on them that you can use AOSP device management with. Teams devices will be one of those categories, though, as we move forward. So again, Android Enterprise isn't supported because we don't have the Google services on the devices, because the devices are purpose-built, and there's really no need for a Google Play Store when nobody's downloading apps on the devices. So now I'm going to do a little bit of deep dive into what do these architecture changes actually look like. And important to note before I get into the technical architecture side, there is no end user facing change to this at all. So an employee sitting down at a Teams phone today versus an employee sitting down at a Teams phone in the future will not notice any difference on the devices themselves. They continue to look, feel, and function the exact same way. This is purely a back end behind the scenes change that IT administrators need to care about. But we've done a lot of care to make sure that end users have no idea anything has happened here. So the current sign-in flow and registration flow for a Teams Android device today is largely focused on you go and you sign in and you're signing into the company portal application on that Teams device. And what happens is step one is you put in credentials. So your email address, your password, you sign in to that device. At which point we do the authentication to Entra ID. So you'll see the authentication flow there go directly to Entra ID and allow you to decide, can you or can you not sign in? The next step is to do an Entra ID registration. That registration step is going to do what's called workplace join. And some of you have probably seen in the past some error messages on some of your Teams devices that say like unable to connect to workplace join. If you have a network block that's blocking you from connecting to certain things, that's that workplace join piece that you're unable to connect to. And then in doing that workplace join, we do an enrollment request to Intune. That's what does the Android Device Administrator enrollment today and connects to the Microsoft Intune services. And then the last piece is once all of that is successful, we hand off that sign-in token to the Teams app, and that allows you to use the MSAL library that you see there to pass the token back and forth and sign in successfully into Microsoft Teams. Now, with all of that said, that is how Teams Android devices work today. It can be a Teams room, it can be a Teams panel, or it can be a Teams phone, or a Teams display. All of them function the exact same way. Now, we're changing this architecture because we're getting rid of the company portal app. So now it's, okay, what's this going to look like instead? And I didn't do the whole build craziness here, so let me just make sure that we've got all this built out. So what's going to happen instead is going forward, you're going to see step one is going to be the same user sign-in experience that you have today. They're going to sign into the Teams application. It's going to look the same. It's going to feel the same. In the background, though, we're now going to hand off to the Microsoft Authenticator app instead of the company portal app. That Microsoft Authenticator app is going to do the authentication to Entra ID, That same step that was happening with the company portal app before is now being handled with the Authenticator app. Step 2 is that same workplace join experience, but that workplace join experience is being handled by the Authenticator app instead. Then what happens, though, is it's going to hand off to the AOSP app to do the actual enrollment into Intune. So this is where now you see two different apps instead of one app doing the same configuration and these same steps. And then last but not least, once we've signed into Intune successfully, we've done our Intune join, we've done our workplace join, we're now going to provision and sign in and do the device enrollment pieces in the Teams Admin Center. That way you've got your device management pieces as well. The device enrollment piece is actually the same on both sides. It was just missing from the other architecture diagram. At the end of the day, though, the sign-in flow is very similar. It's just being orchestrated behind the scenes with two separate apps. From an actual implementation perspective and what it looks like from an end user perspective is entirely the same, but just sharing this with everybody so that they've got the more broad knowledge of, hey, Microsoft, what did you guys actually change here?
Hey, and Matt, 1 second. Yep. We're getting a couple comments about audio being very choppy, so I don't know if you want to turn off your video or try to adjust something.
I can do that. Let me put my headset a little higher. Maybe that works. It's a little bit better. You tell me.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit better.
Okay. If it's not, I can turn my video off and we can keep rolling. But
yep. All right, keep going.
All right. Yep. Stop me if you think so, or just ping me in the side chat. So next piece is, hey, what's in a firmware update? So beyond just doing that sign-in piece, Microsoft today, we do firmware updates on these devices, and we do app updates on all of our Teams devices as well. So I'm just going to advance so that we see the whole setup here. Here we go. Today, across all of it, at the top right, you're going to see what is Microsoft own from a Teams Android device perspective. And so Microsoft, we own the admin agent, we own the Teams app, we own the Authenticator app, and we own the AOSP management app running on all of these Teams devices. This way, we have a consistent framework across every OEM, across every manufacturer, across every device, and a consistent manageability story. The last piece that's owned by the OEM is the OEM app that gives them the ability to add their manageability steps in, add camera controls in, add custom controls and custom capabilities in that make their devices unique to that OEM. That continues to be there also. All of that is bundled together into a firmware update that's made available on your Teams devices. So what you see then is a firmware update that's available for your Teams phone or your Teams room or your Teams display or your Teams panel is all bundled together. All of those applications are packaged. That's then uploaded into Teams and delivered to your device. We also have the ability to update these apps independently. So if there comes a time where, hey, we need to update the admin agent because we have a new manageability capability we want to bring forward, we can do that just by updating the admin agent on the device without doing that full firmware update. And it just depends on what makes sense based on how we're doing the deployments, but that's what's available today for customers. And now that I've explained the architecture and the why around this change, what I want to do is explain what the actual migration is going to look like. And so now this is the big piece that we want everybody to be aware of is, hey, we're doing this migration. This is a change that's happening in your organization. And there is work that you as an IT admin or you as a partner need to coach your customers through in order to make sure that they're successful. So we're doing this migration. The reality is this migration is going to start in Q4 of this year. So the goal is October. Don't hold me to it. It may change. All of these updates are going through what is called TAP right now for Teams, where we have customers validating every single firmware update for every single device in their environments. We've already done the validations. The OEMs have done validations to make sure that this migration is successful. But now we also need to do this in customer environments to make sure that we didn't miss something along the way from a migration perspective. So all of this is going through TAP and then is going through long haul testing as well to make sure that things remain stable in the long term and so that we don't end up in scenarios where a device signs out after 7 days. You know, it migrated successfully, but 7 days later it's unstable. So we're going through and making sure that this is all stable in the long term. So Like I said, this migration is going to take place from a general availability perspective in Q4 of the calendar year. Goal being that we deliver it in October. It's going to be right around October. The updates are going to be made available in a manual fashion. So they're going to show up in TAC. Your devices are going to show updates available in Teams Admin Center, but they're not going to automatically install because we want to make sure that you've done the steps I'm about to talk through here before you update the firmware and try to do a migration. Because if you don't do the steps first and you try to do a migration, the device will sign out, and that's not going to be a positive experience for anybody. So we want to make sure that we're in a good position ahead of time. With that said, we will be switching to an automatic update process because manual updates can be a bit arduous for customers. Let's say you've got 10,000 Teams phones in your organization. You don't want to manually update every single Teams phone one by one. You want to be able to do that in bulk. We will be switching to automatic update in 2025. So we give time for folks to do a manual update, deploy the manual updates, test it in your organization, make sure your configurations are ready, and then we'll flip to automatic update in 2025. That way, if you don't want to click update, awesome. Let us auto-update your devices. We'll auto-update them during the predefined maintenance windows. You'll be good to go. Or if you want to update all your devices ahead of time manually, go for it. You can schedule the updates in Teams Admin Center. You can do bulk updates in Teams Admin Center, but it means actively clicking on each device. So there's a little bit of pros and cons there just based on what makes sense for you. But now I want to walk through the, what does that actual migration journey look like? And what have we outlined for customers? So the actual activities that you as a customer or you as a partner for your customer need to either take or educate your Intune admin around is you need to go and create a AOSP device enrollment profile. The reality is the only thing you absolutely have to do is create that enrollment profile. And it is very easy. You go into Intune, into the Intune admin portal, you go and create that new AOSP device management enrollment profile. And when you create that new profile, there's a checkbox that says this is for Teams devices. You can go through, check that box, and then click save. That's all you have to do. You can assign it to resource accounts if you want, or you can just assign it across your entire organization. That will ensure that your devices can enroll in Intune successfully. It is a very easy checkbox for everybody to do, and it is something very simple. The next piece is, if needed for your organization, if you want to do Intune compliance policies to say, is this device rooted? Is this device running a certain Android version or higher? Or some of the other compliance policies, you can do that, and you can go and create new compliance policies that map to your AOSP device management enrollment profile. You likely already have compliance policies today for device administrator. So what you want to do is look at your existing Intune device administrator compliance policy and map what configurations you've got there and just match them up for the AOSP device management one. But you do need to create a new compliance profile, a new compliance policy, excuse me. And at the same time, a configuration profile. You can go through and create a new configuration profile and say, hey, this new configuration profile assigns these configurations to the device and let it work through its stuff as well. Once you've done your compliance policies, your configuration profiles, and created your enrollment profile, you're now ready to apply firmware updates. So you can actually go through and see that firmware update available in Teams Admin Center, install it on the device. When you push update in Teams Admin Center, that update will queue in the background for Teams Admin Center. It will then install and download onto the device. The device will automatically unenroll from Intune using the device administrator methodology, and it will re-enroll in Intune using the AOSP device management enrollment profile instead. This all happens in the background, all happens during that firmware update period. The authentication token that was used previously will be reused at the new enrollment, and the device will remain signed in. So if you've got 10,000 phones, there's no worry about, oh, let me go run around and re-sign in all 10,000 of my phones. No, your devices will remain signed in. We've worked very hard to make sure that that happens. And that has been the big push along the way here to ensure that this is as seamless as possible for customers to get them to that more modern process. And now what you'll see here is what I've described just in a timeline format where you create your new profile, you create whatever configs you need, you push the new firmware lands on the device upgrades, unenrolls, re-enrolls, reboots, and it stays signed in. And end users are none the wiser. You can do it for somebody that's on their device at home. You can go through and do any of that. It's really, really straightforward. So now I'm going to walk through step by step what the enrollment profile config looks like, what the compliance policies look like, just as examples. We also have blog posts about this. We've got a full migration learn article that's already published about this as well, and it's been out for a while, to make sure that everybody knows step by step by step what needs to happen, something that you as the IT admin can do, or if you need to hand it to your Intune administrator, we've tried to make it as seamless as possible. There's screenshots and there's step-by-step instructions. You can also share this video. This recording will be up in a couple of days. So step one, and this is the only one that is mandatory. If you don't do this, your devices will sign out, and then somebody's going to get a call who's going to call somebody who's going to call me, and then we're going to have this whole conversation of, well, did you create your enrollment profile? It's going to be like, oh, no, I didn't do that. So the only mandatory step is to go through, and you're going to go into Intune, into the devices section, and then into the enrollment section. And in that enrollment section is a title that is called Android Open Source Project Without Managed Google Services. And you're going to pick the corporate owned user devices one. You're going to click that, and you can see a screenshot of it here on the side. But the reality is it's a very self-explanatory form. You give it a title. You give it a description, if you want, of what that policy was created for. You say, this is for Teams devices, and you click the yes button. And then I think there's an option for, is it Wi-Fi or not? You don't need to do anything with that section. And then the only thing that I do want to call out here is there is an expiration date. So our security initiatives have mandated that there be an expiration date on this policy. That expiration date is 90 days in the future. Now, when you create your policy, create it 90 days in the future. What that's going to do is go, okay, it's 90 days into the future, we're good, and we will allow that profile to be used for 90 days. At day 80, at day 85, whatever it might be, go into that policy, edit it, and you can extend that enrollment profile another 90 days. That's all good. Now, one thing that we've had a couple questions on is, hey, what happens if I forget to extend that policy? Are all my devices going to sign out? No. None of your devices will sign out. The one thing that will happen is if you don't extend that policy or create a new policy, you won't be able to sign in new devices. So, word of caution, make sure that you're being vigilant, that every 90 days you're extending that policy and making sure that it's available. But that's the only step that you have to take to ensure that your devices remain signed in and remain functional. Otherwise, everything else self-explanatory. You can target that to all devices in your organization, to a group of users, to a group of devices, whatever makes sense based on how your organization is laid out, and allow those user accounts to do the enrollments as it makes sense. Now, that is the only mandatory step. Create your enrollment profile. If you also want to explore conditional access policies and compliance policies and configuration policies, you can do so. So same way you create a compliance policy today, you can go through and create an AOSP compliance policy. And you'll see the compliance policies and the screenshots here. There are different sections that you can go through. You can do it based on health, based on properties of the device, or based on the system security of the device. You can go through as an IT admin and define what those are for your organization and assign those and use those as part of conditional access as the compliance check for your conditional access policy. So that's available for anybody that would like to use those from a security perspective. And then last but not least, what does it look like from a supported perspective? So all devices that are currently certified for Microsoft Teams will be moved to this AOSP device management platform. And I've got links here of, hey, the Teams Rooms devices, the Teams phones, Teams panels, and Teams displays devices. All of them will move to this new framework in the next, let's call it 6 months. All of them will move. Now, what happens if I have a device in my organization that isn't moving? What do? Device administrator is going away. Microsoft, you keep telling me device administrator is going away. Hey, we need to do something. We need to change this. We need to make something happen. What should we do here? So for devices that aren't moving, and I will get to exactly which devices aren't moving. They're also written very clearly in the blog post, but I'll get to that in a second. there are a small subset of devices that aren't moving. They are legacy devices that aren't supported and aren't certified anymore. They are not moving to AOSP device management. But what you can do is they'll continue to work on device administrator while device administrator is supported. Device administrator is targeted for end of life at the end of the calendar year, at which point device administrator will be deprecated. Devices not migrating, you can still use without doing Intune enrollment. If the device is enrolled with device administrator, you'll need to unenroll it and then turn off the Intune license for that device. So this is a little kludgy and not the easiest thing in the world, but this is what happens when you're running end of life and end of support devices, unfortunately. At which point, if you remove the Intune license from that device can continue to sign into Teams while it functions and while that Teams app version continues to function on Teams without doing the Intune enrollment piece. It'll sign in, it'll still function from that perspective. You won't get any of the Intune benefits anymore because that device is end of life. And then because I like asking, I went and found every single Teams device that is end of support and end of certification that will not be moving. So this slide here has the complete list of devices today. If any of this changes, the blog post will be updated with anything that might change. If an OEM chooses to add support or add certification in the future, I'll make sure the blog post is up to date. And if a device for one reason or another doesn't move, I'll also make sure that the blog post is up to date with that information. But that will cover everything and make sure that you know which devices are moving in your organization and which devices aren't. I fought really hard to get the full list of devices, though, because I didn't like just saying, well, all of the certified devices are moving, because then somebody goes, well, what about this? Or what about this? It's like, no, if you have a Teams device and it's not on this list, it's moving. If you have a Teams device and it's on this list, it's not moving. We'll keep it really cut and dry and really easy for everybody. And then last but not least, because this is PowerPoint Live, I have dropped a link to the two slides or to the two articles that are most important for learning more about this. So the top one is a blog post that was written with Q&A. It's got some questions in it. There's been some comments. We've gotten a lot of really great views on it. I think 15,000 plus people have read that blog post or something like that now. But that walks through the same content that I've shared here, just in a blog format instead, with the same why around it, with the same story. And then also it links off to the Learn Migration Guide. Now, this is a guide that we created that is very specifically geared towards, hey, I'm moving my devices. What do I need to do as an IT admin to move my devices to this new platform? I can go through and do these things and roll through it and step by step by step, create my profile, create my configuration, create my compliance policy. I'm off to the races. We will be creating new documentation for new device enrollments in the future. What does a new device look like? What does that story look like? That Learn documentation will be published once AOSP device management is supported. Right now, we just have the migration docs there because that's what's relevant to today and what's relevant to devices available. The net new devices in the future, we have a cool auto update methodology coming that'll make that better anyway, but more to share on that once we're ready. But with that, I only had about 30 minutes of content, and if you ignore my technical difficulties at the beginning, I have made it through in roughly 30 minutes, and I wanted to leave a lot of time for questions so that folks could go through and ask questions, because I know there's been lots of questions on this. We've tried to answer as many as we can in the blog post. And I've added more questions and answers to the blog post over time if folks haven't noticed. So I encourage you to continue to look at that. I'm now going to look at my iPad and try to read some of the questions that have been in the chat too. But Donald, if you've got ones that are important, let me know.
Yeah, and I want to reach out and say thank you, Microsoft people who've been answering a lot of those questions. That's great. We appreciate that. I do know when you're going through that setting up that profile piece, there was a couple of questions about being able to get notified because the fact is, if they're going to do that 90-day policy, when is it going to go out, right? And being able to set up a new one. Any idea, any thoughts around PowerShell scripts or any kind of an alert that you would suggest around that, just so that they know, hey, this policy is expiring or this needs to be renewed type of thing? There's a little bit of a thread that's going on there.
So we don't have a immediate plan for an alerting methodology today. Candidly, we're still working to try to extend beyond the 90-day mark. So the reason we haven't created alerting yet is the goal was that you didn't have to do it. The reality is, with the security initiatives that we've been pushing through at Microsoft to better secure our customers' environments. There's always a balance between user experience, IT admin experience, and security. We're in one of the states right now where if we don't get the approval to extend it beyond the 90-day mark, we'll then look at some of the alerting methodologies. But today, there is not an alerting capability available. The goal would be we can kind of make it 180 or 365 days, which makes it a little bit easier and a little bit less painful on IT admins. Today, we acknowledge the 90-day one is a bit challenging, but it's the delicate balance here.
It is. Oh, for sure. We actually do have Andrew raised his hand. Thank you, sir. And you know what? I'm going to just give me a second. I'm going to bring everybody. I want to allow you to come off mute. All right.
Oh,
but
being brave.
Don't everybody do this, please. And I will ask, hang on, give me 2 seconds. All right. So looks like Andrew dropped his hand, but Kendra, looks like you have a question. Why don't you come off mute and ask your question?
Okay, so I had a question with regard to what we should do more or less. So I put it in the chat as well. We recently had an update to our audio codes C44, 4550 phones. When the new firmware got pushed through, they somehow inadvertently downgraded the phones and they all got logged out. Not all, but I'd say a good number of them. And even though I was able to go into the admin center and see the devices, they looked offline to me. So I couldn't remotely just log them back in. Someone had to physically be standing in front of it, and it wasn't logged out. It just had a new activation code. So my question to you is this a issue where those phones, should have been, on the new AOSP and I need to create this new profile, or is that a one-off issue?
So that has nothing to do with the AOSP device management stuff yet because it hasn't been released. We haven't released that for any product in GA yet. So that sounds more like a one-off audio codes issue, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Perfect. Andrew, I see you are back on. I'm going to have you come off mute. Go ahead and ask your question. And then he dropped his hand. So no. All right. Maybe not that much of a question. Leonard, you have a question.
I was trying. Yeah, I've been receiving phones from Poly. I'm using the 500 505s, and it's funny because they're coming into me with version 7.0.3. When I go to the Poly server, it will not update. They will not move off that 7 version, and I'm a little worried that when we start all this, it's.
Go ahead, continue.
Yeah, so I'm a little worried that when we do start moving to this updated system that we're looking at right now, that a lot of my phones will not get migrated over.
So do you have a case open with Poly to figure out why they won't move off of 7.
Yeah.
I forget what exact build number it was.
Yeah, 7.0.3. I have a few that are stuck on 8.1.2. I go out, I use the HTTPS, IP address, go right into the phone. I select the firmware. One point it was working fine where the phones would reboot and the firmware would update. Now the phone just sits there, doesn't reboot. I'm not sure what's going on with any of this, but I'm very concerned. I have close to 1,000 phones in my environment, and I'm still adding more. I'm migrating the whole US to 2 teams, and so I'm looking probably at the end of all this, probably over 2,000 phones. And again, I'm a little worried that Poly's sending phones out that are version 7. They're already up to 8.1.6, and I'm still getting phones that are version 7 and can do nothing as far as update the firmware. So that's a concern that I have, a big concern that I have, that a lot of my phones, once you guys make all these changes, this version's not going to be acceptable, and they're going to fall off the Intune server.
Yeah, I mean, so For net new devices going forward, we're building an auto update methodology for them. So new devices that are coming with old builds, we will have a way to automatically update them when they connect out to Teams for the first time. That's work in progress today. But for devices that you've got in your fleet that are running builds that old, you're going to need a support case with Poly to figure out why they won't update. And Poly should be able to help you get them up to date. I haven't heard this from any other customers. Just being
Yeah,
candid.
I just sent Polly probably a half a dozen. I mean, I have right now close to 300 phones that are roughly on version 7. And I just sent a handful of MAC addresses to them to say, okay, you know, what can you guys do for me? These phones will not upgrade off the current firmware. So I'm still waiting for a reply from them, but I'm just a little worried that, you know, again, there's, you know, Poly's still sending out phones that are on version 7, and I cannot update them. You know, and these are brand new phones. They're brand out of the box, and I'm still. I mean, I just received more phones today. I'll be receiving more phones. Like I say, I'm moving the rest of the country to Microsoft Teams. It's a work in progress, of course, but you know, I wish they would be sending these phones with a better version, so I won't have to worry about, you know, upgrading the firmware every time I get a brand new phone. I know that's not, you know, you know, you guys are all Microsoft, but somebody
Right.
should yell at Poly, like,
Well,
hey.
Yeah, no, and I mean
Great.
we have a plan to do auto update because we know that stuff sits on shelves for a while. You know, the unfortunate part about manufacturing devices is you build with a certain firmware, and then suddenly, you know, then they sit on a shelf for a bit. Maybe things get bought in a different order. They go through different distributors who sell in different scale. So there's always nothing is ever going to come fully up to date, unfortunately, out of the box. At which point, then we're building the auto update methodologies to handle that. But from a why won't your devices update, a support case with Poly, especially if you've got 1,000 devices, Poly should be on that pretty quick.
Yeah, and now with the upgrades that you're currently going to make, will version 7 be accepted into these new, you know, the new Intune server, or do I have to be on a certain firmware version
You
where
will
the
need to
phone,
be on the latest and greatest firmware version from Poly,
right?
because
And
the
that's
newest version will include the AOSP pieces. So you have a couple of months now to work with Poly to get your devices up to date, but you will need to work with Poly to get your devices off of the Poly OS 7.0. Whatever build you're running today.
yeah. And the other question I have, I know when I do go into, you know, their server, it has a version 9, but I see most of all the phones should be at least a 8.1.6. I'm not sure what 9 does because most people aren't using 9 yet.
Yeah.
So can you confirm, will the AOS be on 8.1.6, or will it be another version or firmware version that they're going to come out with?
It will be on a net new firmware that doesn't exist today.
Okay.
So it'll be a 9 dot something build, if I recall correctly from the preview program.
Leonard,
Okay.
we've got a lot of people on the line. Let's move them
Yes.
along.
I
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you,
your
guys.
question.
Absolutely.
Suba, you're
I
next.
believe.
Yeah,
Yep.
come on off. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. We're going to get to you.
Thanks,
Suba, do you
guys.
have a question?
Yes, sir. Will there any changes for licenses with AOSP, right? Like previously, there is a device filtering on conditional access. We need a P2 license to be mandated as per the Microsoft portal, but with the AOSP, right? Especially for the cap accounts, right? When there is a device filter is on, do we still need the P2 license, or shared device license will be sufficient?
So depending on what you're trying to do, you may still need the Intune P2 license based on Intune compliance policies or things like that. The shared device license does not include all of that. There is no license changes between the Android device administrator build and the AOSP device management builds. The same license requirements are still in play.
Got it. Thanks, Matt. And the second one I have, I'll try to minimize my question here. The second one I have is hot desking functionality. Previously, we couldn't able to do hot desking functionality because of the authentication, the way the modern authentication works, right? Will there be any changes with respect to AOSP or hot desking.
So there's no changes for the authentication side, and for hot desking, we fully support modern authentication today. So I'd be curious why or what the issue is, but it's not specific to this MDM enrollment migration.
Yeah, like earlier it was asking when we tried hot desking, it was asking a username and password. Like it doesn't give me like any authentication or authenticator app when we are doing the hot desking.
I would open a support case on that one. It sounds like something's not configured the way it should be.
Got it. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you for the question. Right.
Syed.
Yeah, come on off.
All right, thanks, hey Matt. So we already configured this enrollment in our Intune for 200 plus Android devices that we have. You mentioned this thing, maybe I missed it, but do we need to assign the resource account to this enrollment profile, or is it automatically something happening behind the scene and coming in here?
So it depends. When you are creating your enrollment profile, you can either select all or you can select a group. So you can either assign it to a group of users in your organization or a group of resource accounts if they're for common area phones or things like that, or you can just assign to all. So either way, as you're going through the enrollment piece. But if you go look at your enrollment profile that you created and go to the properties section, you'll see at the bottom what it's assigned to. And if you grabbed all, then you're good. If you grab the group of users, you just need to make sure that it's in that group.
So it's a default for now, the scope tag.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so it's everybody, right?
Yeah, by default, it's everybody unless you specifically scoped it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. The date, expiry date in this one, you already mentioned that once it passes, it's not gonna unregister. But sorry, you mentioned to recreate it. Sorry, what did you mention there?
You can either recreate it. So if it expires, you can't edit it and change the date into the future already. You can edit it before it expires, but if it expires, you just create a new one. And just name it number 2 and kick the can down the road 90 days. If you happen to open it ahead of time at 89 days, you can edit it and you can change the date forward. But those are your options there for the expiry today. Yep.
Options. Okay. Well, I mean it's still 5-6 days left, but it's all grayed out. So I suppose I have to
you might have to, or depending on who edited it originally.
I agree.
To go in and edit. Okay, then you might have to delete and create
a
new one. Yeah.
All right. A lot of people down there. So
thank you. Hey, thank you, Syed. I don't want to mention that Don dropped the survey link in. Appreciate it. And it's always an opportunity to win what's in JW's closet from the Team Swag Box. So please join. Post your question if we don't get to, but Corey, you're up next.
Yes, Corey.
Sorry, I was first earlier, but I had some mic issue.
Oh, Andrew? Is this Andrew?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are using filter for device and conditional access policies. And there we sometimes use include to do blocking and exclude to do exemptions, but we specifically use the device.model and device.displayName.
Okay.
I just want to know with AOSP, does it change how the device display name presents itself to Azure, like conditional access policy before zooming in and enroll? Because that's when we do the exemption. You see, the device display name is, they recommend, well, what we had is the manufacturer and model name all stuck together.
Correct.
As the syntax.
Yep.
And after it's being enrolled, it's,
So that does not change as far as I'm aware. I have not seen that change on the devices I've tested on so far.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I would encourage you to test just to make sure. We're given time to do manual updates and things like that, but nothing's changed there today.
Okay. What about SIP gateway devices? Are they supported?
No change there at all. So SIP
Yeah,
gateway
okay.
doesn't do MDM enrollment today. SIP gateway is entirely outside of this.
Okay, so it's outside of scope. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thanks
Thank
very
you,
much.
Andrew. Corey, go ahead. Come off mute.
Hey guys, two quick questions. One, so we've updated the firmware on some of our Crestron TS770s. It doesn't look like we're in the preview, so when it rebooted, it didn't enroll. For the devices we've already updated, will it automatically reboot and re-enroll on its own, or is that something we would need to trigger?
So for device, so this firmware is not GA yet. So unless you've joined a Teams preview program, you shouldn't have a firmware that has any of the AOSP stuff on it yet. So any devices you've got in market today and deployed in your organization would not have any of this stuff on it yet. But when it's available, the unenroll and auto enroll happens at the time of the firmware update.
Okay, so the firmware that we got off Crestron's website from 8/21/2024 isn't related to this. It's just happenstance. Okay.
Yep.
The other question I had created the corporate owned user associated AOSP enrollment profile token. I had the same issue. Someone else mentioned that their token expiration date was not able to be extended. So I just went to create a new one, and I no longer have the options to say that this is a Teams device. Did something occur from my tenant access, or?
That's a new one for me. So are you using the user associated enrollment one?
Yep.
Yeah. Hi.
Yep.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Matt. Actually, we have in our organization, we have faced the same issue. So you can open a support case. It may be like in the background, when you deleted the profile, it has not deleted correctly. So in the background, it is still there, and that's why you are not able to create a new profile with the Teams device enrollment enabled. So you can create a support case, and then you can find it out. Or if you can, I'll send us steps through which you can find the like hidden profile inside your organization.
Oh, that'd be great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maresh. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Daniel, I think you're up next.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Donald. Quick question. So and I know this session is a little bit more oriented towards phone. My question is actually an MTR-based question. We're utilizing Cisco's new MTR device standards, the Room OS devices. Just wanted to find out from you, Matt, if Cisco is involved in the same TAP for AOSP.
Yeah. We just shipped to TAP all of the Cisco AOSP device management firmware yesterday. Was it yesterday or the day before? I saw the announcement about it, so that one's top of mind for me.
Right on. Very good. Really, that was my main question. Just wanted to make sure that they were involved in that from your guys' perspective, obviously, because that's the part that matters. So thank you. That's all I had.
No, we've been working very closely with all of our OEMs for more than a year, candidly, but very closely in the last 6 months to get all this working correctly.
Right on. Thanks very much.
Perfect. Thank you. Ken, can you come off mute and ask your question?
Yes. I saw a question flow by, but I didn't hear the answer. This is assumed to be released going GA and commercial. When will it become available in GCC? And then following GCC would be GCC High, which is what we're in. And then DoD, of course, after that. So do we have any timelines on any of that?
Yeah, so the enrollment profiles are already there in GCC and GCC High. It's not yet there in DoD, but we generally don't publicly comment on DoD. But GCC and GCC High, the enrollment profile capability to create it is there already. The firmware will GA at the same time for GCC, and it's generally 2 to 4 weeks later for GCC High. So there will be a slight variability there, but the reality is it will be very tightly coupled across commercial GCC and GCC High.
So is the authentication that's happening with the Android-based devices still going to be user/password authentication in this platform, or is there going to be a more secure authentication method used?
So this is only changing the Intune MDM piece. So the user and password, the username and password is still the authentication part. That isn't changing. The MDEP conversation that's been going on in the chat will have more of the authentication pieces later in the future, but this piece is not changing the authentication story at all.
Thank you.
Yep.
Perfect. All right, thank you. Darren, you're up. If you can abbreviate your question, that would be great. Come off mute. Oh, Darren left. All right, so Joey, I think you're up next.
I'm still here. Sorry, this is Darren.
Oh, you are. Sorry, go ahead, Darren.
I'm curious what users are going to see when a device tries to sign in if the expiry date is passed. What error message? Is it another workplace join error or something else?
Yeah, you're going to get it's basically a workplace join error that'll show up on the screen. It'll say something along the lines of unable to connect to Intune, I believe is the exact error message, but I haven't seen it in a little bit, but it's a very similar error.
Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Joey, you can come off mute, please.
Hello, hey Matt. Just a quick question about AOSP's go live date. So it looks like GMS is not going to be supported December 31, correct?
So device administrator, the tentative date for end of life is the end of the year. That date may change, so you haven't seen a published end date yet.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So then what we'll plan on doing is enabling this Intune policy. We'll set that up. And then once this changeover does happen, we won't have to touch any devices. They will auto update correctly, and then everything should be fine. Is that what I'm getting here? As long as they're on the latest version.
Correct. What I would encourage is create the profile, and then once you see updates available, manually update a device or two at least.
Okay.
That way you know that you've done the enrollment profile correctly or any compliance policies correctly. Because what I wouldn't want you to do is go, okay, I created it, and then I'm going to wait for Microsoft to auto update me. And then I don't know how many devices you've got. Say you've got 500 devices. We auto update 50 of your devices overnight, and they all sign out on you. I don't want to do that to you. So at least test it first. But you can, if you want to just go for it, you can go for it.
No, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, if I make that policy today, right, and then I go and try and get a device updated, within the next couple of weeks, will that be using AOSP, or it won't be using AOSP yet?
Not yet. So okay. The AOSP firmware will be marked in, and maybe I don't have the screenshot in this deck, and I should add the screenshot to this deck. But in Teams Admin Center, when you're moving to the AOSP firmware, when you go to do the update and you go to trigger the manual update, there's this giant warning that's going to pop up and be like, hey, before you do this, read this document. And we're going to link off to the docs that I've got linked on the screen here still. Those docs will be very clear of like, you need to do this. And so the firmware will be noted as AOSP in the firmware update, like naming scheme that shows up on the screen as you go do the updates in Teams Admin Center. So we'll be pretty clear on that one.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
I do know we're at time, but I have still 4 people with questions. So if we can hang on a little bit longer, Matt, that would be awesome. Right. Bendino, can you come off mute? Bendino,
yeah,
there we go. Perfect.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for taking my question, team. Hey, I just had a quick question for you. So we haven't brought Intune into our environment fully yet. So my question was, are you guys, does this allow you to still have device logs, or is that still something we go through TAC still, and kind of what does device diagnostics look like moving forward with this platform coming out?
Yeah, so no change on the diagnostic side. The logs would still come out of Teams Admin Center, and that'll still collect everything. This is just the MDM enrollment side of the journey.
Okay, copy. Thank you.
Yep, perfect. Thank you. Alexander, go ahead, sir.
Hi, just really quick question. So when well, in the environment today within Intune, we have a group that's associated with the admin enrollment. Once I set up the profile for AOSP, if I utilize that same group, once the firmware upgrades, does it automatically know that it needs to enroll as AOSP, or do I have to remove the group from the device admin enrollment?
So it automatically knows which profile to use. So the new agent that comes down with the firmware update only speaks AOSP device management. And the old agent that we're removing from the device only speaks device administrator. So when we remove the one, it only talks device administrator. When we add the new one, it only talks AOSP device management. There's no intermixing of the two, so there's no chance that it would accidentally enroll with the wrong one or something like that.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you so much. Yep.
Awesome. Great call. So Neil, you're up.
Hey, just a quick question. The Wi-Fi in the profile, if you've got the username password, will you be supporting SCAP later on?
Maybe. I'm not gonna. I won't comment roadmap here, but let's go with maybe. Sorry for not giving a better answer. Not supposed to comment roadmap publicly, but maybe.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe. Another question.
Oh my gosh, do we have Corey?
Please, everybody's got time. Yeah, please continue.
Last one. This is gonna be the last one. We got to cut off sometime. Go ahead, Corey.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I had noticed in the enrollment restrictions section inside Intune for Android restrictions, there isn't anything regarding enabling or blocking AOSP enrollments. Is that something that may have accidentally been missed, or is that not a requirement?
So it is intentional, actually.
Okay.
So for standard AOSP enrollments that aren't Teams devices, there's a QR code you have to scan to do the enrollment. So it's a very specific, like, I'm deliberately enrolling this way conversation.
Okay.
For Teams Android devices, that checkbox disables the QR code and does it automatically instead, and it only works for Teams devices. And every device that signs in will join as a corporate device. There's no concept of personal Teams devices from an Intune perspective. So there's no enrollment restriction there. If you want to block certain accounts from doing it, you just have to do that in scope in the enrollment profile.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
All right.
It's awesome. Thank you.
Great.
Dimitri, take one more if you're okay with that, Matt.
All right.
Thank you, guys. I guess my question is, that 90-day expiration, is that the maximum, or can that be extended? And if I'm assuming it's maximum, what's driving that?
So what's driving it is Microsoft's internal security practices are driving that. That's the journey right now. The reality is it was built using the same QR code conversation that I mentioned very briefly earlier. The QR code expires after 90 days, and there's no way to extend that QR code beyond the 90-day pan. Now, when you turn on it for Teams devices, there's no QR code. So instead, you still get the 90-day token expiry. The reality is it doesn't actually impact anything on the devices. So we're having a conversation with our own internal security teams on why we need to be able to have it longer and things like that. But the Microsoft's own security is what's driving that conversation today.
So is that an expectation that the 90-day is just for the initial migration, and at some point in the future, you guys will be able to extend that? Or that's TBD and you can't comment on the roadmap items?
TBD, can't comment on roadmap. I've said it a couple times though on this call already. We are working to try to extend it, but that we understand that that's a sticking point for customers. We acknowledge that. There will either be an opportunity to extend it or a way to monitor and alert before it expires, one or the other. But today we're in a state where you've got the 90-day expiry and you got to put a calendar alert.
Understood. And I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's try to be candid with everybody at least. We're working on it.